Great, thank you very much, Hannah. So I'm afraid I had to sort of abandon the title that you gave us because I don't have a strong background in heritage. And so what I'm really going to be talking about is my current role as co-champion for the UK Climate Resilience Programme, which is a role that I share with Suraj Desai at Leeds University, and my experience of bringing in arts and humanities research into what is a fairly science-heavy research programme. So I've worked on climate adaptation in a number of guises for about 25 years now, and I've particularly played roles sort of that span policy, academia, and its application in the real world, in decision-making in organisations. And so I've worked in a number of boundary organisations that were specifically set up to play this kind of bridging role. And Hannah, I noticed she mentioned climate outreach, and that's another sort of formative experience for me. I was a trustee and chair of climate outreach for about 10 years. So that's an organisation that's very much focusing on how we, the sort of psychology around climate communication and how you engage audiences, new audiences, and reach new audiences around climate risk communication. But my focus here is going to be about the UK Climate Resilience Programme. And as champions, Suraj and I have a role in shaping the research calls and supporting the funded research so that it achieves the goals of the programme. So the vision of the programme is this: to enhance the UK's resilience to climate variability and change through interdisciplinary research and innovation. And it's a strategic priority fund, which means that it has to link closely to the priorities, the government priorities. And Marie earlier from DEFRA talked about, the climate change risk assessment and the National Adaptation Programme. So these are our sort of target audiences. We're sort of providing research that will help government devolved administrations to think about what they need to do. So the focus is on research that is useful and usable. So that's a very key driver, and the way that we design the research and how we think about evaluating it. And there are sort of these three key objectives for the programme. One's around characterising the climate risks. One's about how we manage these climate risks through adaptation. And then the third one is about how we co-develop climate services for specific situations. And as you can probably see, that the way this is presented here is kind of a scientific looking approach, and we have a thing called a science plan that sort of is the overarching sort of narrative for the programme. And it's about £90 million worth of research, just under, and it's delivered through the Met Office and UKRI, so that's through NERC on behalf of AHRC, EPSRC and ESRC. So I'm going to say a bit about some reflections on what I think, what I'm hoping that we will get from bringing a more arts and humanities focus to the programme. I mean, having worked on this area for a long time, there was an innocent idea right at the beginning that if you provide information, people will change, people will use the information and create, and this will lead to action on the ground. But overwhelmingly, this climate information is presented in this very scientific way. And there's a perception that if you just fine-tune it and do more and more and more, that people will change. But as George Marshall, who's the founder of Climate Outreach, says, you can't engage people by hitting them on the head with an even thicker report. And so scientific information research alone is necessary, but clearly insufficient. And we also need research on many other things, and psychological aspects of how we deal with dread, anxiety, risk communication, research on the ethical aspects of climate impact, spiritual practices, and many other things. But Mike Hume, the Tyndall Centre, suggests that climate change, a bit like COVID-19, actually gives us an opportunity to help us work out what it is that we value and think about how we want to live. So it's an opportunity for self-understanding. But we find it very hard to address. Actually, I'll go back. There's lots of good reasons why it's a very difficult thing to address. It's often presented in this very kind of with this doom-laden language. A recent survey that the programme funded on British attitudes to climate risk identified that although a lot of people still perceive climate change as something that's out there in the future and over there somewhere else, the actual psychological distance that people experience from climate change in the UK has actually become a lot smaller. but this doesn't necessarily translate into action for a number of reasons. You know, the doom-laden language can, and we've had also from the National Front Forum, you know, the experience of climate change and the language around it can lead to huge anxiety, which can make people tune out, you know, reach denial, like a feeling of numbness and paralysis. Because of all of this information, it can feel like an overwhelm of information, and it's complex scientific information, and that can stump people, and it's difficult to know exactly which information you can trust. There's also this sort of sense of control, and what can we as individuals or as organisations actually meaningfully change? And if the action doesn't feel meaningful, why would people act? And this can lead to a sense of apathy. And what's the point in making changes if the issue is so vast? And as a policy scale, you know, we do need to make some really difficult choices. And you know, Caitlin and others have talked about this, you know, acceptance of loss and dealing with loss, and that it's really difficult to get to that, to start to have those conversations. How do we do that? How do we bring those people together, given there's so many vested interests and conflicting goals and aspirations, and there will be these winners and losers, and lots of people have touched on the fact that we need to consider equity, fairness, justice, and those who are impacted the most have often contributed the least to creating the problem. And the architecture of our institutions and our social norms make it hard to make changes if we feel that we're sort of locked into sort of pathway, unsustainable pathways, unsustainable ways of doing things. So we need to work cooperatively across sector and scale boundaries to create significant change. So in the programme, we have recently had a call on living with uncertain change, which the AHRC has led. And the aim of the call was to think about the ways in which societies have understood, articulated, coped with and adapted to climate changes and taken up new opportunities. And it's about thinking about accepting loss, living with uncertain or disorderly change, and building climate resilience in the real world. And there was a really great interest and great response to the call. And I'm hoping we can soon announce the winner, who will get the funding. But I want to make just a few reflections to sort of about what I'm hoping that this research will bring to the programme. And that I'm not from the arts and humanities community myself, so it may seem a bit naive. So I was hoping this would play out one by one, but anyway, it can't do that on WebEx. So the first one was around imagination and creativity. So I feel that the arts and humanities can play a crucial role in raising awareness of climate change through art, literature, film, and highlighting our awareness of our own vulnerability, of that of cherished places and artefacts. So Caitlin mentioned awkwardness and sort of the palliative curation around something like a lighthouse. And this can go on to influence how we choose to reshape, revalue, grow, and transform how we engage with our changing environment and take action. And it's also, I feel, a possibility it's possible to bring in more of our emotional, intuitive intelligence rather than just being in our heads, which the scientific research kind of encourages us to do. And so, you know, exploring things around derangement or feeling out of kilter, finding ways to experience grief that comes with making difficult choices, and bringing together fragmented elements of the system, seeing the complexity and connection, and using artistic practices to provide navigational aids or metaphors or facilitating mechanisms to enable deeper conversations between people from different parts of the system. And then linked to that, sort of these new narratives and language, understanding how narratives and language may act to motivate or demotivate how we respond. Thinking about narratives around letting go and even losing control over decision-making processes, which may be a necessary part of resilience building, and providing opportunities for reimagining narrative change and initiating conversations about what we value and want to protect. Another aspect is already come out from other people around a sense of place, identity, connection, and understanding the distinctiveness of the places that we care about and how a changing climate influences national and local culture and tangible physical realities, personal memories of loved places and feelings of not belonging. But oral histories and arts-based practices can draw out sort of these stories of weather and how people could experience the environment and normalise uncertainty. So the other aspects of this are connections with the past, how people have experienced and learned to live with change and loss, and also thinking about the future, so thinking about foresight and futures thinking in ways that move beyond just sort of thinking about socioeconomic or physical futures, but also bringing direct and sort of and the affective level, and provide collaborative ways of making sense of the future. There's been a lot said about bringing new and marginalised voices, and I feel that arts and humanities research approaches can do a lot to support us to think about deprivation, social justice, and inequality. And one sort of, I guess it's one of the final ones, which is about transdisciplinarity. The research we are funding is multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary, and scientific projects aren't always that good at doing that. They maybe think that they are, but they're not necessarily that good at it. And I think there's a lot we can learn about co-production and transdisciplinarity and the outputs that, films, there's new outputs coming out of this research around films and websites and podcasts and artists and musicians and residents, which hopefully will reach new audiences beyond more traditional research around public policy briefs and papers, conference papers and things. So I'd be really like to hear if I'm missing anything and any ideas other people might have about how to sort of fertilise the scientific aspect of the programme with these arts approaches. Thank you.